Parshas Vayigash. This week's Parsha picks up where last week's Parsha left off, which is a cliffhanger. Yosef had planted his goblet in the sack of Binyamin, and Binyamin was caught. Now, Binyamin didn't steal it, Yosef did it, but he framed Binyamin, and that led to his saying, look, I'm not going to take this out on everybody. I'm just going to take the person who, Nimtza Gavia B'Yado, the person with whom the stolen goods were found. He'll be punished, but not everybody else. And Yehuda steps up to the plate, and he makes an argument. At the very end of the argument, he says, please, he says, let him go, take me instead. How am I going to be able to go back to my father without the child, meaning Binyamin? Because I won't be able to tolerate seeing the bad that happens to my father. And at that point, Yosef can no longer contain himself. And the verse now we're talking about, Mem Hey Aleph, 45:1, verse 1. And Yosef can no longer hold it in, and he says, everybody leave. And then the next verse, Vayitain es kolo b'chi, he gave his voice in crying. Now, some say that this simply means that he cried. The Netziv, however, says that he says the following words while sobbing, which is in the next verse, which is Vayomer Yosef Elachov, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef, Ha'od Avichai, famous words. Is my father still alive? Now, this a question that many of the commentaries ask is that he's already established that his father's alive. So why is he doing it? So Radak, others say that really what he's trying to do is engage his brothers in conversation. This is the great reveal. He's telling them that this person, this stranger who's been hassling them over monetary matters and being spies and all this stuff, that it's actually their brother. They were freaked out, and the Torah says as much. It says, V'lo yochlu echov la'anos, so his brothers couldn't respond to him, ki nivhalu mipanav, because they were shocked by his appearance, by his presentation, by his being there. They were just absolutely freaked out, and one can understand that they sold their younger brother into slavery, and they never heard from him again, and all of a sudden they show up and he's running the country. That's quite shocking. Plus, they're confronting the person who they did this to. It's not just an abstract news. Oh, hey, did you read the news? Did you read the headlines? This is Yosef revealing himself to them. So they're freaked out. They can't speak. Their jaws have dropped, and they cannot utter a word. And they're scared. He's a very powerful man, Yosef. He could do anything he wants with them. He could incarcerate them all. He could kill them all. So Yosef sees he's got work to do. Now, according to the Radak, Yosef, when Yosef says, Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? They've established that his father's alive, but he was trying to engage them in family small talk, so he could say, and how are you, and who did you marry, and your children, all this stuff, but they were Yosef has had quite a bit of time to process this. They've had no time to process this. So the first thing he says is, Vayomer Yosef Elachov, this is now Pasuk Daled, that's verse 4, Geshuna Elai, come to me. Vayomer, and he said, Ani Yosef Achichem. Now he has to validate this because they're not necessarily accepting that this person is actually their brother. He said, so he lets them in on things that presumably only they know, which is, Ani Yosef Achichem, I am Yosef, your brother, Asher Machartem Osim Mitzrayim. You sold me to Egypt. But, next verse, hey, 5, don't be sad, don't be subject to turmoil, the fact that you sold me here. Because God sent me to support everybody. And he goes on, he talks about it's been 2 years, and there's going to be more famine, and God sent me before you to take care of you. And it wasn't really your fault. He's very gracious. He says it's God who did it, but they don't really know. Is he being honest? Is he setting them up? What's going on? They don't really know him at this point. And then he says, go tell my father that I'm here and everything I've accomplished, and tell him to come back, and I'll take care of you. And then he says, you see, your eyes see, and so does Binyamin, that it's kipi, my mouth, speaking. Well, of course it's his mouth, but the Meforshim, the commentaries say, he's speaking in Lashon HaKodesh, he's speaking in the Holy Tongue in Hebrew, and it was not the spoken language of Egypt. He's trying to give them details and proofs, etc. Okay, then they're still silent. He fell on the neck of his youngest brother Binyamin, who was not involved in the sale, and he cried on his neck, and Binyamin cried on his. Then, and here's the key verse. This is Pasuk Tesvav. That's 15, verse 15. Vayinashek l'chol echov vayefka alehem. He kissed all of his brothers, and he cried on them, each one of them. V'acharechein dibru echav ito. And after that, his brothers spoke with him. Guess what? What did they say? Let's look at the next verse. Doesn't say. V'akol nishma beis Parro. This is just saying that the word got out to beis Parro. It doesn't say what they said. What did they say? So there's some Mefarshim who say they finally were able to put their angst aside, their shock aside, and to engage in the discussion of, how did all of this happen? What happened to you after you got sold? What was the turning point? The turning point was two things. One, he kissed them. Two, he cried. That shows, say the commentaries, that he was sincere. Up until then, the brothers didn't know. They were so freaked out that they couldn't even bring themselves to speak. Once he kissed them and cried, they were able to speak. Why? Because that was a window, if you will, to his true intention. And his true intention was that he sincerely wanted to be close to them, and he wanted, evidently, to put the episode behind him. There are indications throughout the rest, until everybody passed away, there are indications that the brothers were never completely convinced. They always had this nagging thought that maybe once Yaakov would pass away, Yosef would take out his vengeance on them, etc. That, of course, didn't happen. But the big gap was between his revealing himself and his convincing his brothers that he bore no ill will towards them. And he did that by being honest, by reaching out, by initiating, by crying, and by kissing them. Anybody, we all know people, they're politicians, we see them on TV, who say nice things all the time, and they do not mean it. Now, there are probably some Academy Award-winning actors or actresses who can cry on demand. Most people can't. But to kiss someone, to kiss a brother, and to cry, that creates the safe space to share. And there may be a lesson in this. So many times there are breakdowns in relationships, and frequently those breakdowns in relationships are where the relationships typically would be closest, which would be within families. But things happen. There's history, there's trauma. One sibling wrongs another, and then they don't talk. They don't have a relationship. And sometimes the key is for the one who is offended, not the offender. Everybody waits. The offender waits for the offended waits for the offender to come and apologize. After all, he did me wrong. But if what you're interested in is the relationship, then sometimes it's the person who is hurt who should do the reaching out. It's the person who is hurt who should kiss the other. It's the person who is hurt who should cry, to show that he really welcomes a restoration of the relationship. And by showing that he welcomes a restoration of the relationship, he can actually enable a restoration of the relationship. Family relations are difficult. And when a person who, according to strict justice, could wait around until the person who caused the harm reaches out and attempts to repair the relationship, you could wait a lifetime and unfortunately die with regrets. On the other hand, you could use the opportunity to reach out, to be vulnerable, to show, to demonstrate your sincerity, and to say, as a practical matter, whether it's in these words or not, but to take the actions that demonstrate that I care about you and I'm willing. You may have to work out the details. You may have to work out that was really bad, etc. However that goes. But the first step is to reach out and to create the possibility of reconciliation by being able to speak. V'acharechein dibru echav ito. After that, the brothers were able to speak. Have a good Shabbos.